In September of 1933, a New York attorney named Frederick Barber Campbell walked into the Chase National Bank on Broadway and asked for his gold. It was his, 27 bars of it, roughly 5,000 ounces deposited under his own name in a vault he was paying to use. The bank said no. Campbell did what a lawyer does. He sued. And within days of filing, the United States government indicted him, not the bank that was holding property it refused to release. Him, the man who had asked for what he owned. The charge carried a $10,000 fine and up to 10 years in a federal prison. Now, you have probably heard some version of this story before. The government came and took the people's gold. Agents at the door. Vaults emptied at gunpoint. That is not what happened. What actually happened was quieter, entirely legal, and far more instructive because the mechanism they used in 1933 tells you exactly why they would not bother using it today and exactly what they would do instead. On the 5th of April, 1933, 5 weeks into his presidency, Franklin Roosevelt signed Executive Order 6102. The language was bureaucratic. The effect was not. Every person in the United States was required to deliver all gold coin, gold bullion, and gold certificates in their possession to a Federal Reserve Bank. The deadline was the 1st of May, under 4 weeks. In exchange, you received $20.67 per troy ounce. The official price. Paper dollars handed across a counter for metal. There were exemptions, and they matter. You could keep up to $100 in gold coin, about 5 ounces. Dentists could keep gold for fillings. Jewelers and artists could keep working stock. And rare or unusual coins of recognized collector value were exempt, which is a detail we will come back to because an entire industry has been built on it since. Everything else went in. And here is the part people find hardest to believe. Most Americans complied. Not because of the fine, because of the framing. The country was in the 4th year of the Great Depression. 9,000 banks had failed. A quarter of the workforce had no job. Roosevelt did not present this as a seizure. He presented it as a rescue, a national emergency measure, and handing in your gold was framed as a patriotic act. Newspapers ran photographs of citizens queuing to surrender coins. By the deadline, Americans had handed over gold worth roughly $300 million at the official price, hundreds of tons of metal, and private ownership of gold in the United States would remain illegal for the next 41 years? So, that is what happened. But here's the question almost nobody asks, and it is the only question that actually matters. Why did they need it? The United States government in 1933 could tax. It could borrow. It could issue bonds. Why go to the extraordinary length of criminalizing a metal that ordinary people kept in dresser drawers? The answer is not greed. It is arithmetic. In 1933, gold was not an investment. Gold was money, not a hedge against money, money itself. Under the gold standard, every dollar in circulation had to be backed by a fixed weight of metal sitting in a vault. The Federal Reserve was legally required to hold gold equal to 40% of the currency it issued. Now follow what that means. It means the government could not create a single new dollar unless it first acquired more gold. The money supply was chained to how much metal existed inside the country's borders. And in 1933, America had the opposite of an inflation problem. Prices had fallen roughly 25% in 3 years. That is deflation, and deflation is a doom loop. Here is how it runs. Prices fall, so people delay purchases. Why buy today what is cheaper next month? Delayed purchases mean falling sales. Falling sales mean layoffs. Layoffs mean less spending. Less spending means prices fall further. And critically, debts do not shrink. A farmer who borrowed $1,000 still owes $1,000, but the crop he sells to repay it now fetches half what it did. The way out of a deflationary spiral is to expand the money supply, put more dollars into the system, break the expectation that prices keep falling, and let debtors repay in cheaper money. Roosevelt could not do that. the gold standard forbade it. Every new dollar needed new metal behind it. So he did the only thing the arithmetic allowed. He took the metal. Not because he wanted the gold, because acquiring it was the only legal route to printing the dollars. Now rewind back to Frederick Campbell at the counter at Chase. When you first heard that story, it sounded like theft. A man asks for his property and is prosecuted for asking. But look at it again with the mechanism in front of you. Campbell was not being punished for owning gold. Campbell was being punished for holding a piece of the national money supply outside the system at the exact moment the government needed every ounce of it to break a deflationary depression. His 5,000 ounces were not a personal fortune to Washington. They were roughly $100,000 of currency that could not be issued. And there is a final twist. Campbell's prosecution collapsed. A federal judge threw out the indictment on a technicality. The order had been signed by the president when the underlying statute required the Treasury Secretary to sign it. Roosevelt's people fixed the paperwork within days and reissued it. Campbell walked. Nobody else tried. 9 months later, on the 30th of January 1934, Roosevelt signed the Gold Reserve Act. It set a new official price for gold. Not $20.67. $35. Now sit with that for a moment. The government bought the nation's gold at $20.67 and then, having bought it, announced the price was $35. In dollar terms, the Treasury's gold holdings jumped in value by roughly 69% overnight. The paper profit was about $2.8 billion in 1934 money, and it went straight into a new exchange stabilization fund. For the citizen who complied in April, the arithmetic was brutal. You surrendered an ounce for $20.67. 9 months later, that same ounce was worth $35. Your dollars had lost roughly 41% of their purchasing power, measured in the metal you used to own. That is the part that stuck, not the order, the revaluation that followed it. And America was not alone in this. Australia passed a law in 1959 giving the Commonwealth the right to seize privately held gold to protect the currency, a power that sat on the books, mostly unused, for decades. Britain, facing a sterling crisis in 1966, banned its citizens from holding more than 4 gold coins and blocked private imports. That restriction lasted until 1979. The Netherlands imposed ownership controls during the Depression, and in the most brutal form, Nazi Germany systematically stripped gold from the central banks of every country it occupied. What links every one of these is context. Crisis, war, currency collapse. Governments reach for private property when the alternative is the state itself failing. But there was one more piece to the 1933 story, and it is the part that almost never gets told. It is also, I think, the most important. For generations, American contracts had contained something called a gold clause. If you issued a bond, signed a long-term lease, or wrote a mortgage, you could specify that repayment must be made in gold coin of a stated weight and fineness. It was standard protective language, and it existed for exactly one reason. It stopped a lender being repaid in a currency the government had quietly devalued. By 1933, gold clauses appeared in an estimated 3/4 of American long-term debt contracts. They were in corporate bonds, they were in railroad debentures, they were in the federal government's own Liberty bonds. Now think carefully about what the revaluation did to every one of those. If a contract said repay me in gold, and gold had just moved from $20.67 to $35, then the real value of that debt had just risen by 69%. Overnight. Every borrower in America who had signed a gold clause, including the United States Treasury, would have owed 69% more than they had borrowed. It would have bankrupted the country a second time, and it would have done it using the government's own policy as the weapon. So, in June of 1933, Congress passed a joint resolution that simply voided them. Every gold clause in every contract, public and private, retroactively canceled. Debts written in gold became payable in paper, at face value. That went to the Supreme Court, And in February 1935, the court ruled in a set of decisions known as the Gold Clause cases. It upheld the cancellation. Barely. 5 votes to 4. And the reasoning in one of them, Perry against the United States, is worth hearing in full because it tells you something no summary can. The court held that Congress had acted unconstitutionally in repudiating the gold obligations on its own federal bonds. The plaintiff was right, and then it held that he was entitled to no damages whatsoever because the gold he would have been paid in was, by then, illegal for him to own. He won the argument and received nothing. That is the 1933 episode compressed into a single case. The government changed the price. Then it changed the contracts. Then the highest court in the country agreed that changing the contracts had been wrong and awarded no remedy because the underlying asset had been criminalized in the meantime, every step of it legal or made legal afterwards. So the real question, could it happen again? And I want to give you a straight answer rather than a comfortable one. No. Almost certainly not, and not for the reason you would like. It will not happen again because the entire reason it happened has been dismantled. The United States left the gold standard in 1971. The dollar is not backed by metal. The Federal Reserve does not need to acquire an ounce of anything to create $1 trillion. It does so by adjusting numbers in a ledger. The constraint that forced Roosevelt's hand simply does not exist anymore. And the second reason is ownership. In 1933, gold was in everybody's pocket, in circulation as everyday coin. Today, surveys suggest only a small, single-digit percentage of American households own any bullion at all. There is no national money supply sitting in private hands to recover. Confiscating it would be enormous political damage in exchange for a rounding error. But, and here is where I want you paying attention, the absence of confiscation is not the absence of risk. It is a change in the method. A government that needs your purchasing power no longer has to come and get your metal. It has better tools, and they are all quieter. Inflation is the first. When the money supply expands and your savings do not, the transfer happens without a single law being passed. Roosevelt needed an executive order to devalue the dollar 41%. A modern central bank can achieve the same over a decade and call it policy. Taxation is the second. Physical gold is taxed as a collectible in the United States at a long-term capital gains rate of up to 28%, meaningfully higher than the rate on stocks. That is not a conspiracy. It is written in the code right now. And reporting is the third. Dealer reporting thresholds, cash transaction rules, cross-border declaration requirements. Nobody takes the gold. They simply ensure they know where it is and take a share when it moves. Which brings me back to that exemption for rare and unusual coins. For 90 years, some dealers have used the 1933 carve-out as a sales tool, arguing that only collectible, numismatic coins are safe from a future seizure and charging premiums of 20, 30, sometimes 50% over melt value on that basis. Understand what that is. It is a fear from a monetary system that no longer exists being sold to you at a markup today. The exemption was real. The threat it supposedly protects you from is not. So, 5 things worth doing, and none of them involve panic. 1. Keep records, purchase receipts, dealer invoices, dates, prices. Not because someone is coming, but because your tax basis is the difference between owing on your gain and owing on the entire sale price. Documentation is worth real money. 2. Understand the collectibles rate before you buy, not after. Up to 28% on long-term gains in physical metal. It changes the math on whether bullion, a mining equity, or a fund suits what you are actually trying to do. 3. Do not pay numismatic premiums for confiscation protection. Buy rare coins if you love rare coins. Buy them for scarcity and history. Do not buy them because someone told you they are seizure-proof. 4. Split your storage. Not against government seizure, against fire, theft, and a single point of failure. Home safe, insured domestic depository, and if the amount justifies it, a second jurisdiction. 5. Watch the fiscal calendar, not the headlines. Debt ceiling fights, revaluation proposals, changes to reporting thresholds. That is where the actual policy risk lives. It arrives as a line in a bill, not as a knock at the door. The 1933 confiscation was real. It was legal, it was effective, and it cost the people who complied about 41% of what they handed over. But it belonged to a monetary system that has been dead for 50 years. The reason it will not be repeated is not that governments became more respectful of private property, it is that they no longer need to. When you can devalue a currency by keystroke, you do not need an executive order. The lesson of 1933 was never they will take your gold. The lesson was when a government is trapped, the rules it wrote are the first thing it changes. That is still true. It just does not require a queue outside a Federal Reserve Bank anymore.